Right, well, welcome to the Culture Corner, where we talk about the latest films, games, and cultural issues and what they mean for American culture and American conservatives. This week, we have Ridley Scott's Gladiator 2, a sequel that nobody asked for and took decades to get produced. Tyler, were you looking forward to Gladiator 2, or do you think we should have left this very old yet popular franchise alone?
I'm a very big fan of the first Gladiator movie. I think that it has a lot of strong themes. I think that it has a lot of strong messages for men and for doing the right thing and for sort of overcoming adversity and even managing grief. And it does all of this in a very masculine kind of way. I think for me, maybe in terms of spectacle, I think the coolest thing that I was looking forward to was like the water battles. But even from the trailers, you could sort of feel that there was a loss of realism in terms of the aesthetics, right? That it was a lot heavier on CGI, and I think maybe that was an early indication of what we would go on to see in terms of the actual content of the film.
I agree, and I think you made a very good point. The original Gladiator is honestly a very conservative movie and a very masculine movie and was very popular with American conservatives. So I think making a sequel to that in this climate where Hollywood is much more openly left wing immediately bodes ill for conservatives. And although it's not as extreme as I thought it could be, definitely some of that works its way in. I think also, as you pointed out, part of the charm of the original Gladiator is that something about it felt kind of gritty and grounded. Obviously, it's very Hollywood and it did have CGI in it, but it felt a little bit more real. It was kind of the end of that era when movies were being shot on film and there was still that kind of like tactile, kind of organic quality that you could feel in the film. And yeah, you can tell that this one was largely shot on green screens. And even beyond that, the cinematographer actually came out on a podcast and said that he was very disappointed with the way that Ridley Scott works these days, choosing to shoot things with multiple cameras simultaneously and not allowing enough time to relight for each shot, which means that the lighting was not up to his quality standards.
Well, and on that point, I even saw the actors say in an interview recently where they said, "Oh my gosh, it was so hard to, like, where do you position yourself? How do you, because you sort of will give a glance to a camera or in a certain direction, knowing how that's going to play in one angle." And it was one of the actors who said, I asked him, like, "Hey, can we just do this take with like maybe just two cameras instead of six?" And he's like, "No, no, absolutely not." So I mean, it's clear that Ridley Scott still has some of the makings of like an auteur filmmaker, if we want to go back to film school 101, where he is making really intentional decisions about even the production and how it's done. But it feels like he's lost a little bit of the eye for where that direction should be going.
Yeah, I think the problem is twofold here because, on one hand, I agree with what you just said. His just filmmaking quality itself has taken a noticeable dip. But beyond that, even, it seems like he's become more openly left wing in a way that doesn't benefit his stories. So, again, the first Gladiator, regardless of how much this was intended or not, it ended up being a very conservative movie. It had, a lot of virtuous themes, despite the revenge at the core of it. But it had a lot of masculine themes. It had a lot of themes of responsibility and overcoming grief and moving forward in life after tragedy. And this one just doesn't have those. And I think with recent Ridley Scott films, something that's frustrated me so much is that he wants to make these films with historical settings, but it seems like he has kind of a disdain for the time periods and the people in them. Like he's constantly having little critiques of the worldview. He has like agnostic or atheistic comments spoken by all his characters, kind of very anti-hierarchical, very kind of modern American values being placed in these characters' mouths. He's kind of using his characters as a mouthpiece for his own very contemporary and timely views. Is that something you've noticed at all?
Well, I mean, what you're saying to me is what I feel like I heard at the time for Napoleon in so many ways, that this is kind of a repeat of some of the moral failures of that film and how they depicted everything that went on. In a lot of ways, this also reminds me of The Matrix Awakens, the newest one, or maybe it was Resurrection, was it?
I think it was Resurrection, yeah.
Yeah, Resurrection. But I think that there's this thing going on in Hollywood where they go like, oh no, Republicans or right-wing conservatives, whatever you want to say, are they're taking a message from this old film, and it's not a message that we agree with anymore. So we need to put a new thing out that says a message that we're more comfortable with. And with that, I think that you see a lot of really bad art because it is sort of message first.
Yes. And I think, filmmaking aside, that is the central problem with this movie, is that they know what the audience for this film is. Like, I can't think of any liberal-minded people that are super excited about Gladiator. Like, this is mostly conservative, right-leaning people. And the fact that you would make a movie, which in theory should be catering to the audience, giving the audience what they want, and they're actually using these things not to entertain or inspire, but actually to preach. And so it's kind of a bait and switch where, you get, older boomer conservatives excited about seeing a sequel to a movie that they loved 20 years ago. And what they're hit with is messaging that they disagree with. And it's very kind of disrespectful to the audience, I think.
Absolutely. And I think, you see something similar even with the casting of the film, that there are a lot of liberals who were cast. But that there's even, Denzel Washington cast as the emperor in this film. That, not that we can't race bend an emperor ever. It certainly went great for Hamilton that one time. But I think that there is a lot of signaling to quote unquote modern audiences happening.
Yeah, I will push back on that a little bit because that particular emperor originated from North Africa, I believe. So it could be argued that he was darker complexioned.
But he didn't have a Brooklyn accent.
No, and
well, people thought it was funny that he didn't, hop on the board to do the accent with everybody else.
Yes.
That he kind of was just like, no, this is how I sound.
Yes,
it's gonna be fine.
But here's the thing: what I just said aside, I agree with you. I think they were looking for every and any opportunity to, place representation in this movie, whether or not it made sense. So, you can make a historical argument that maybe that emperor was black, but, the fact that they're jumping on every opportunity to, get their quota requirements in is annoying. But I will say, Denzel Washington was the best part of that movie. He was so charismatic, and he made all the other actors look like cardboard. So I'm actually kind of glad that he was in it, even if it was possibly DEI motivated. But the thing that troubled me more than that, regarding the kind of obtuse representation that was put in, is, again, the first Gladiator was a very male-centric movie, and that's fine. That's good. I think we should have movies that are male-centric and movies that are female-centric. I think both stories need to be told. But they had a male audience, and then, this film, the very first character they show on screen is an obscure female gladiator that appeared in the first one. She was in the film for like 3 seconds and had no lines of dialogue, but she was the first person they showed on screen because they wanted to kind of push back against this masculine frame. And then the first line of dialogue in the film is delivered by the main character's wife, and she's chiding him for not being gentle with the chickens. And so the first line of dialogue is kind of a woman kind of chiding a man for acting, too like toxically masculine. And it's like, this is not the movie for that to be done. Like, this has a very specific audience, and it represents something that these kind of jabs are deliberately designed to go against. Do you think that's something that has been becoming more and more common in movies, or do you think it's just like a healthy and natural way to expand audiences for these movies by placing more female representation in these movies, for example?
Well, there's an old adage in Hollywood, and maybe it's outdated, but maybe there's still some truth to it, which was that men will go see, rather, women will go see movies with men, right? Like girlfriends will go see whatever movie their boyfriend picked, but boyfriends don't usually go and see the movie that their girlfriend picked, right? Like they're not going to go see Pride and Prejudice because that's more of a female marketed movie, right? And I think that modern studios sort of need to learn that lesson again, that if you, one, are constantly bashing your core audience, people don't want to pay to go be bashed, or at least the people who do are not a great, demographic of people. But also that, if your movie is for men, then make it for men, and make it, sort of invigorating for men.
I agree. And I think, well, first of all, I would say I would definitely go see Pride and Prejudice. That's just a great franchise. That's a great, great book and some good movies. But I agree with what you're saying, and I think I think it's good to represent women in films. It's good to represent minorities in films, but it needs to be done in an organic and natural way that makes sense to the story. And furthermore, I think it's even better with a franchise like this that is very directly aimed at men. I think it's better to just cater to men for this film and then make a different film that caters to those other audiences. So yes, by all means, make another movie that is more female centric, or make a movie that represents minorities in ways that they historically weren't. But I really dislike this trend of altering and warping established franchises away from their intended purpose for political reasons.
Well, Ben, in honor of Gladiator, would you say, thumbs up or thumbs down for if conservatives should go see Gladiator 2?
I'm going to give it a thumbs down.
Oh.
It's fine. It's largely inoffensive. Like, despite the things I pointed out, it's subtle enough that general audiences probably won't notice or care. But its greatest crime is that it's just not a great movie. Like, it's just fine. It's just lukewarm. And that's honestly the worst kind of movie. Because if a movie is really bad, you have an emotional reaction to it. Like, it makes you feel something, and it's a conversation starter. But if a movie's just lukewarm, you just forget about it. You just feel like you wasted your time and you don't remember that 2 hours. And that's kind of the way I felt about Gladiator 2.
All right. Well, with that, let's move on to the next topic.
And moving on from that, our next cultural story is that there is a new Lord of the Rings movie in the works, and it's called The Hunt for Gollum. The main thing that's getting discussed right now is that it's going to feature Aragorn in it, since it takes place in the middle of the Fellowship of the Ring, and Viggo Mortensen has been asked to return to the role. So, Tyler, it seems like Lord of the Rings has gotten the Kathleen Kennedy treatment recently with Rings of Power and the Gollum video game that flopped pretty hard, getting the worst game of the year award. Uh, do you think Lord of the Rings should leave well enough alone, or are you excited enough about Middle Earth that you want to see another installment?
I mean, listen, I will always take more Middle Earth. I'm that kind of a fan that I want more, but I also want more that's in the spirit of the books, right? We have this source material, so we don't need to go off, and that's sort of where we ran into with Rings of Power, where they're like, well, there's 3 lines. That's all that we have the rights to, and we're just going to extrapolate from there. Unfortunately, that's kind of the case here as well, right? That this is based on kind of just a couple lines that were said by Aragorn at the Council of Elrond in terms of having met Gollum loosely before, and it kind of gives like a couple sentence outline for what is now going to be this entire movie. I'm not as upset because of the people who are behind this one. I trust that. I hope that they're going to do this kind of in the style of the originals. But it's been a very long time since we've had a good Lord of the Rings movie, period. The Hobbit movies were certainly a tonal shift from the Lord of the Rings films. Rings of Power, very much so, have been a vibe shift. In terms of the Gollum video game, I think that was really a poor studio choice in so many ways. I've played that game. I've watched that game. It's more than the worst game of 2023. It's the worst game of the decade, easily.
Incredible. Yeah, I don't think it bodes very well for this film that the subject matter is very similar to a video game that flopped so hard. But I agree, we'll have to see whether the talent involved can redeem it. I think the main thing that troubles me about the continuation of the Lord of the Rings franchise is that the main story has already been told and it's perfect. And I think it's best if you have like particularly a trilogy that is so perfect, that is as perfect as Lord of the Rings. You really want to just leave it well enough alone. Like, you don't make a sequel to the Mona Lisa because it was so well received. Like, that stands in and of itself, and you make something new that can try and raise the bar in different ways. But the main problem with this movie in particular is they're stretching so much for source material and content from the books that just isn't there. And so they pick these very obscure references that nobody's really asking for stories about, and then expand them into these expansive 2-3 part things, and it's just too much. And furthermore, part of the beauty of Lord of the Rings is that it leaves so much to the imagination. Tolkien is very good at evoking images and stories in your mind with very few words, and your imagined version of this story is so much more interesting than anything you can see on screen. And my fear is that more and more we're seeing kind of a Han Solo situation where we find out how he got his name, how he got his gun, how he met Chewbacca. Like, we're explaining every little detail and those things are better left to the imagination, so that the story paradoxically feels bigger when things are left untold rather than told. Would you agree?
Well, and I think that trend has been going on since Indiana Jones, where they had young Indy, sort of like, oh, I got my whip, I got my hat.
That is where this started. I love Steven Spielberg.
It was Spielberg.
Last Crusade is a great movie, but that is where this started. So this is on Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, I think one of my concerns is, Viggo Mortensen is obviously, he's a tremendous actor. I've loved especially some of the things that he's gone on to do after Lord of the Rings. But he's a little old for this. So how are they planning on sort of doing, like, is he just going to be Because I think by the time we get to the Lord of the Rings movies, he's like 85, but he's Dunedain, so he stays young. How are they going to deal with him being, older in an earlier set film?
So, Tyler, we have this beautiful thing called CGI. And what CGI does is it turns all your actors into rubber. So, basically, they're going to give him the Indiana Jones treatment. Going back to Indiana Jones, he's not signed on yet. The story states that he needs to read the script and evaluate whether it's something he's interested in participating in. So if Viggo doesn't do it, they're going to recast him. Which, I'd love to see
that might
Viggo
be
back.
even harder for me to handle, honestly.
It might, but at the same time, I don't want to watch a 2-hour movie with a rubber Viggo Mortensen running around. I think in the Indiana Jones 5, when Harrison Ford is de-aged, it does have that kind of uncanny valley effect where if you look at a still image, you're like, yeah, that looks pretty real. That looks pretty convincing. But then when you see him moving around and you see that he's actually an 80-year-old man with a 40-year-old computer-generated face, something feels very off. It doesn't quite work.
Here's what I will say gives me some hope for that option is The Irishman. And again, Scorsese's sort of on a different level in a lot of ways, but I did think that the de-aging was done pretty convincingly there. I didn't find it to be particularly distracting, and they did it over 3 hours because that movie was long as hell. So if they can do that, and if they're planning on doing it for the new season of Stranger Things, we know we just had a movie with Tom Hanks where he's, playing different ages throughout the entire thing. This is clearly a trend in the industry, and I don't think that it's going away. And I think if I had to choose over a de-aged Viggo or somebody else stepping into the role, I might take a rubbery Viggo Mortensen.
We'll see. And I have an even better example for you, and that is Furiosa. Furiosa is interesting because they actually used AI technology to do a face merge with a younger actress. So the main actress that plays Furiosa, there are scenes in the movie that takes place where she's a child, and they actually did like an AI-powered face merge where they not only de-aged her face, but kind of combined it with the younger actress to create a composite. And that was actually so convincing that I didn't realize it was an effect until after the fact, and I was watching behind the scenes. So I think if they use a technology like that, I'd be much more agreeable than just seeing, rubber Viggo running around. Anyway, I love Middle-earth, and I hope that it gets better moving forward because I do think Rings of Power was really a step down, and I'm hoping that even if this wasn't really asked for, maybe this is a chance for them to redeem themselves.
All right, well, with that, let's move on to the last bit of the Culture Corner for the week.
Yes, our final culture story this week is that in addition to Lord of the Rings, there's a new Narnia movie in the works. In fact, 2 movies. There's going to be a 2-part Narnia movie produced by and distributed on Netflix. And the interesting thing here is that it's going to be helmed by Greta Gerwig, the director of Barbie. So, Tyler, I know you're a big Lord of the Rings fan. Are you as big a Narnia fan as you are Lord of the Rings?
I'm not, but I might be a pretty diehard Greta Gerwig fan. So, Barbie was a little bit outside of her normal range of films, but I think that it shows that she can do an established, sort of story, that she can bring something new to it. Obviously that film is not a right-wing film by any stretch. And I don't think Greta Gerwig, frankly, has like the religious affiliation that I'm looking for with somebody who's adapting Narnia. I don't think that she necessarily has like the cultural or the moral background that I'd hope for somebody with Narnia. But in terms of someone who really understands character, who really understands lighting, who really understands youth in particular, which is such a big part of the Narnia story, I don't know that I can pick somebody better than Greta Gerwig. I'm curious how she handles the action. I'm curious how she handles the drama. I'm very curious how she handles the very clear religious elements of the film. But man, there's a part of me that's excited about this.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting one way or another. I also am a big Greta Gerwig fan. I think, as opposed to my worldview as Barbie is, it was a phenomenal movie and so much fun to watch. But more than that, Greta Gerwig has made some very compelling dramas in the past, including Little Women. And I think those films are a better indication of what she could do with the Narnia franchise. But yeah, I agree with your point. I think Narnia is similar to Lord of the Rings, but it's more expressly religious. Like C.S. Lewis was a lay theologian, and the Narnia stories are really intended to be allegory. Like they are stories that stand on their own, but if you read the Narnia books, they're very obviously Christian allegory. And so this is something that's steeped in Christianity, and the primary audience is not just conservatives, but conservative Christians. So I think placing somebody in charge of that is not a Christian, doesn't have experience in this genre, um, I think that's a little concerning. It's certainly risky. So we might get something interesting, but I'm not sure we'll get Narnia.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about this, but this is a Netflix distributed adaptation. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's going to be Netflix. It's actually going to be a two-part adaptation of The Magician's Nephew.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that that's confirmed yet, but it sounds like it's not going to be a retread of the films we've seen already with a new cast. It's actually going to be a prequel, starting with The Magician's Nephew, which is the first chronological book in the story. So I think they're going to try that and see how well it's received, and decide from there whether they want to adapt all the other movies, completing what the Disney was not able to do with their past attempt.
Yeah, I mean, because that first film, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, did very, very well, and then they had quite a difficult time sort of getting people to come back for all the other ones, which I think is kind of Narnia's Achilles' heel in a lot of ways, is that it's not a continuous cast of characters throughout a lot of it.
It's
So
kind
I'll
of
be
like
very
a. It's very appropriate. It's kind of like Susan in the story. Some people just don't come back.
I think that does, maybe I feel this way because I haven't actually read that book. I read several of them, but I didn't read that one. That I feel like even myself, and I can extrapolate this to other people, will be a little bit more open to if they want to be fluid with the story, if they want to make changes to it, right, that are a little bit more woke or DEI, or they want to gender swap somebody, or they want to race swap somebody. If this isn't something that the majority of the audience, really holds very closely to their heart, I think those things are likely to be missed by a majority of the audience.
I agree, and I think it's probably a bad decision strategically because, again, your core audience is conservative Christians. So I doubt that people will be flocking from outside to see a new Narnia movie if they're not already fans, and those fans do tend to be people that wouldn't agree with these theoretical changes. So I'm excited for more Greta Gerwig one way or another, so I hope that it turns out well, and we'll just have to see what happens. And with that, I pass it back to you.